Arsenal return to action on Tuesday night. It's a European away trip to a Ruben Amorim-less Sporting, but that doesn't make it an easy one. We'll continue to react to our best performance in months against Nottingham Forest at the weekend, discuss what the 11 might look like in the Champions League this week, react to some of the other results in the Premier League this weekend, and I'll give you a heads up with regards to what's to come this week on the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Thanks for being here. Hope you're all good. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Welcome back to the pod. Hope you're all having a wonderful Monday so far, or Tuesday, if you're listening to this on Tuesday. How you all doing? I'm feeling a lot better, I got to say. Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we've become favourites for the Premier League title overnight or anything like that. But it's sort of amazing, isn't it, what a convincing win can do for you and your mood going into a new week. I think as Gooners, we're fully aware of the fact that we're 9 points behind Liverpool, who are flying at the moment, it has to be said. But I'm feeling so much more optimistic and positive about our chances of bridging that gap now that I've seen us play at the level that we all know that we're capable of. Hopefully, the blip is behind us. We've got a lot to get into on today's show. Looking forward to getting into it with you guys. Good to see lots of you in the live chat as well. Make sure you get your questions and your thoughts into me throughout the duration of the live stream. If you're listening back on the audio platforms, a big hello to each and every one of you. If you are watching us on YouTube a little bit later on, a big hello to you guys too as well. A like would really go a long way. So make sure you hit the like button. If you haven't done so already, subscribe as well to the channel if you're brand new. Apologies again about the fact that I'm not streaming from the studio at the minute, as I've recently mentioned on the pod. For those of you that don't know, we've recently moved house and we're going through we're in complete and utter chaos, and I can't find anywhere decent to sit on podcast stage of the process. So we're getting there slowly but surely, and hopefully sooner rather than later, I'll be back in a studio setting to bring you this podcast on a daily basis. Just a quick reminder that if you want access to more content on the Chronicles of a Gooner, you can get it. You can visit patreon.com/the Chronicles of a Gooner, and you can sign up to get access to our match day reaction pieces, which normally drop around about an hour after the full-time whistle of a game. Just a quick heads up and a quick warning. The match day reaction piece for the Sporting Lisbon game is going to be a bit later than usual. You're probably not going to get it, if I'm being completely honest, until around about 11:30 or midnight. And the reason for that is because I'm going to be commentating on another game. I'm commentating on Tranmere Rovers against AFC Wimbledon in the League Two. So it's not quite Champions League standard, but it is a big opportunity for me. It's a game that will be televised on Sky Sports Plus. So I've got to do it, but it means that I'm going to be a little bit behind on the Arsenal game. I am going to come home and watch the Arsenal game in full and catch up with what I've missed, of course. I'm not commentating from Tranmere. I'm commentating from a studio in London, which makes it a much easier commute, but it means that I can get home and watch the Arsenal game in pretty decent time. So just a warning that the match day reaction piece this time around will be a little bit later, but I'll give you an extra piece of content over on the Patreon side during the week to make up for it. Right, let's look back first of all at some of the standout results from the Premier League generally this weekend, because I think there's quite a bit to get into. Manchester City 0, Tottenham Hotspur 4. When I heard going into sort of the weekend that Spurs were going to be without Van de Ven, without Romero, I thought this was going to get nasty for them. I thought there was a chance that they turned up at the Etihad and conceded 4s, 5s, maybe even 6s. And instead, it was them who turned up and scored 4 and left Manchester City absolutely stunned. Now, this is an Arsenal podcast, so I don't want to spend too much time giving Spurs their flowers or praise or anything like that. But you've got to give Ange Postecoglou some credit, because we talk about him quite a bit, and we say that he's naive, and we say that he's got one idea of football and he's very stubborn and he won't change it and all the rest of it, and that will be his downfall eventually. And there were arguments that after a really, really strong start to last season, he started to get found out, Ange Postecoglou. To go to Manchester City with the players that he had missing and be as ballsy as that, I think is something that deserves credit. And so, again, it's an Arsenal pod, and I don't want to spend any time really giving Spurs praise or their flowers, but they do deserve it on this occasion because they turned up and they completely and utterly humbled Manchester City. And I guess the bigger question, the more sort of pertinent question for us as Arsenal fans that are hoping to claw our way back into the title race, is what on earth has happened to Manchester City? And is this a temporary blip, or is this something that City fans should be worried about? Is this something that we as Gunners can take advantage of over what remains of the season? I think if I were a City fan, I would be concerned. In previous years, we've seen them have little blips. We've seen them drop points in maybe 2 or 3 games consecutively, but then go on and put together these amazing runs. I'm not sure that that's going to happen again this time. Now, I'm not writing them off because it's Manchester City and they've been unbelievable for a number of years now. And I think if you write them off, you're silly, basically. But I do look at this and I do think to myself, you know what? The problems are quite deep rooted in this Manchester City team at the moment. It's an aging team. It's a team where there are a lot of players, I believe, in the ranks that are past their best. That doesn't mean they're not good players anymore. It doesn't mean that they can't turn up and they can't put a run together. But there's a lot of players in that side that I look at and I just think maybe your best days are behind you. Your Ilkay Gundogan's, for example, a player that they brought back to the club during the summer window. I look at someone like Kevin De Bruyne, obviously technically a superb footballer, and I wouldn't want to write him off, but it doesn't feel like Kevin De Bruyne is the Kevin De Bruyne from 2 or 3 seasons ago. And I think there are multiple examples in that team. I think the uncertainty around Pep Guardiola's future has been something that's been sort of highlighted in recent weeks when talking about their struggles. He obviously signed a contract extension just the other day. It's not the longest of contract extensions, a couple of years. I'm sure there's a clause in there whereby he can break it should the 115 case go badly for Manchester City. But I just wonder if the 115 case is starting to cause problems behind the scenes. Manchester City have been really resilient throughout the duration of this conversation and have said, you know, well, no, we're just going to get on with it. We know what we are. We know that we haven't broken the rules. We know that we've done things the right way. And they've all been quite united in that. But there must be something, you know, that comes over you when your club is under that kind of investigation. And to think, if you're a footballer that's achieved all of those things, all of the things that the Manchester City players have in recent years, to think that there's a chance that it's going to be found that your club got there by breaking the rules or breaching the rules. And again, I don't know that they have, but just to be thinking that as a player, it must be quite depressing. It must be quite concerning because all the achievements that you grew up wanting to achieve, you know, you've done so many of them, you've managed so many of them, and then someone might come along and say, actually, you didn't do it fairly. Like that would be really hard for a player to take, I think, because it isn't the players that have broken any rules. It isn't the players that are sort of being charged with having done something wrong. Essentially, it's the club, it's the powers that be. I would even argue, and I know that some people say that this is impossible, but I would even argue that there's a chance maybe Pep Guardiola doesn't quite know the ins and outs of maybe what went on. And I think he'll feel quite disappointed and betrayed if it does go badly for Manchester City. But I'm just wondering if that's starting to creep into the mindset of the players. And, you know, people kept talking about the Pep contract situation. We know what the deal is with that now, but is the 115 stuff having an effect? Maybe it is, because I just think that some of the basics that Manchester City have done in recent years to maintain their sort of level and to ensure that they're competitive in every single game that they go into have just completely disappeared. Like basics, I'm talking like hard work. I'm talking being switched on defensively. I'm talking about making sure that they manage transitions really well. And I know that there's always been this narrative that when Rodri doesn't play, Manchester City are much weaker and much more vulnerable to the counter-attack. But the way this has gone in recent weeks has been dreadful. You know, counterattacks are a real problem for City at the moment, and they've got to find a better way of dealing with them rather than just pointing at Rodri and saying, well, he's the reason. And I know that one player can be significant and one player can make a difference. We've been having this argument about Martin Odegaard for a while, but Manchester City have got the resources and have got the depth of squad to be coping better than the way they're coping now. Nobody gave us a free pass when Odegaard was out. Nobody would have it as an excuse. People kept saying, well, that's no excuse. It's one key player. Well, Manchester City are without a really key player at the moment, and it's really showing, which goes back to what we said post-Forest, which is that actually maybe football is a lot simpler. then people want you to believe, and actually just missing really good players, it can be a problem. And I think City are finding that. What really struck me though in the Spurs game is that their XG against in that game was 2.51. Now I know they went on to concede 4, but Manchester City under Pep Guardiola, if you look back through some of their XG figures since he arrived at the club, it's gone crazy. Like, this is mad. If you look at what it is per game this season so far, okay, so shots faced on the counter attack. Let's look at that, right? This season, they're conceding 1.17 shots per game based on counter attacks alone. If you go back to last season, it was 0.5 of a shot. If you go back to 22-23, it was 0.6 of a shot, 0.37 in 21-22, 0.34 in 2021. 0.37 in 2019-20. In the 18-19 season, it was 0.21. In the 17-18 season, it was below 0.2 of a shot. And the same in the season prior to that. That's how dominant Manchester City were. So what you're seeing is that over time, their dominance levels are just decreasing a little bit. And right now, when you compare where they are in terms of this season versus last season, they are conceding more than double the volume of shots from counterattacks now than they were last season. So that's alarming. And it feeds into the point that counterattacks are a real problem for them. But as I've said all along, it's Manchester City, and you've got to be really, really careful what you say. You can't sit here and pretend that Manchester City are done or washed or say that type of thing, because we know better than anyone, because we've been involved in title races with them very, very recently, that they are capable of turning it on and going on a run. So I'm not going to write them off and I'm not going to rule them out. But with each passing week at the moment, I'm becoming less convinced that they're going to go on this run that we've seen them go on in many, many consecutive seasons and years now. And I'm actually starting to think that maybe the problems are just that little bit more deep-rooted, because this just wasn't just a defeat in the Premier League, which can happen to anyone. This was a humiliating defeat at home against the side that are Spursy, basically. And yeah, that just feels like a bit of a kind of wake-up call for Man City. Maybe they'll use it and they'll sort of use it as fuel and they'll get back on track. Who knows? But that was a really, really shocking result, I thought. Elsewhere, Aston Villa were held to a 2-2 draw at home by Crystal Palace. Villa have slipped down to 8th now in the table, held at home by the Eagles. Is this a sticky patch for Aston Villa, or is this the start of the Unai Emery drop-off that every club he's ever managed has experienced, and that we as Arsenal fans have been banging on about for a little while, because we experienced it just a number of years ago? They're without a win, guys, in 6, and they face Juventus on Wednesday. If I were a Villa fan, I'd start to be a little bit concerned by what I've seen in recent weeks, because they're not winning football matches. They're not defensively anywhere near as sound as they have been. And creatively, it feels like they've just gone off the boil a little bit of late. So I don't want to say, again, I don't want to draw conclusions around anyone, not around Spurs, not around Manchester City, not around Villa. But we've kind of been there with Unai Emery, haven't we? And when we said that this kind of happens, where he comes in, he brings this new intensity, this new style, he gets everybody's buy-in. He seems like a really nice guy, Unai Emery, and it all goes great. There comes a point where it just goes a little bit stale and people start to struggle, maybe with the messaging, maybe with the intensity. I don't know. But it's funny how the narrative around the club can change so very, very quickly. And I think Aston Villa are in danger of giving themselves too much to do when it comes to the top 4 race. And I've always said it. I said it about us when we were missing from the Champions League. You make the Champions League, great, happy days. It's a payday that you've got to come. But you got to be able to maintain that. Like, you got to go again and again and again and again. And only when you go again and again and again in the UEFA Champions League do you really establish yourself as one of Europe's powerhouses, because the financial gain and the financial benefit is so big that it allows you to take those next steps. Elsewhere, Southampton were beaten by Liverpool. Some of Southampton's play was good. There were moments in the game where I thought they might take points off Liverpool, but it wasn't to be, basically because they can't defend and they press the self-destruct button at every possible opportunity. And I can imagine how frustrated Southampton fans would have been feeling after that game. Mo Salah bailing Liverpool out in the end, doing his bit to ensure that they took all 3 points and maintained the pace at the top. What I would say, though, to take away from this game is not it's look, Liverpool had an off day. They came back from an international break. We've seen that happen many times with many teams. It isn't really something to read into too much. Ultimately, they will tell you they got the result, and that's what matters. But I looked at that game yesterday, and I was watching it very, very closely, and it just became even more apparent than it was already that Mo Salah is just so important to everything that Liverpool hope to achieve this season. So to hear him come out after the game and say that he's more out than in, that there hasn't been a contract offer made to him, that he's a little bit disappointed that the club's hierarchy haven't taken that step yet, that to me is mad. Like, Mohamed Salah is Liverpool's best Premier League era player, in my opinion. People will put Steven Gerrard ahead of him. I don't know what the hell that's based on. Mohamed Salah has been a class act from the day he rocked up at Anfield. He's been outstanding. He's scored crazy volumes of goals for someone that doesn't play as a striker. He's developed his game over time. He's started to stay higher and wider as he sort of, powers dwindled a little bit because of the natural process of aging, etc., etc. Still make sure that he's really sharp and in great shape to be able to sort of come alive in the area of the pitch that it matters. His game has changed a little bit, but he's still a real devastating player. And I think yesterday really highlighted his importance again. And if they haven't sat down today to try and draw up a contract offer, then I don't know when they ever will, because he single-handedly dragged Liverpool through that game, in my opinion. Anyway, that's enough of what's been happening elsewhere in the Premier League. I want to talk a little bit about Arsenal's man, Ethan Nwaneri. So I guess the big question coming out of the weekend around Ethan Nwaneri is, should he have played more? And I've been thinking about this a lot over the past couple of days because, when we were going through that difficult period, there were sections of the fan base that were saying, play him, give him a go. How bad can it be? Throw Ethan Nwaneri in. Let's see what he has to offer. Let's see what he's capable of. But the more I think about this and the more I kind of sit back and look at it with a calmer head, now that I know that Odegaard's back, because obviously that skews your opinion on stuff. Knowing that you're without Odegaard can increase your want to see Nwaneri starting games. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best thing for the young man. It can sometimes be because of what you're missing. The need, the desperation to see that kind of creative spark in that right-sided 8 position can lead you to taking a decision that probably isn't the right one. And the more I think about this and the more I assess it all and sort of look at it, as I say, with a calmer head, because I know that Odegaard's back now, the more I think that Arsenal have managed this guy really, really well. And actually, we were silly to even suggest that a 17-year-old should be thrown in and expected to replicate what Arsenal's best player, in my opinion, does. It was easy to say it because we lack that creativity in Odegaard's absence. But I think where I said earlier that sometimes we overcomplicate football, I think in the case of Ethan Nwaneri, we look at it maybe sometimes too simplistically. So maybe the answer with regards to the question of how you should look at football is somewhere in between. Look, he's 17 years old, guys. Is he physically ready to play at this level every single week, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times? Is he mentally ready with what comes with being an Arsenal starter, or for what comes with being an Arsenal starter? The ability is there. Yes, we can all see that. But ability is not the only metric by which you assess a footballer. Some would argue it should be, but I've seen so many young players, promising young players, crumble under pressure, go off the rails outside of the game and have that then spill over onto the pitch, struggle mentally with the stardom that comes with being an Arsenal super kid. And obviously there's a pressure as well. And there's a pressure that you put on yourself as a young footballer trying to make your way. There's a pressure that comes from the media. There's a pressure that comes from your manager, your teammates, etc., etc. And I just think that sometimes, in some instances, we have to just sit back and trust the people that are making the decisions know better and know best. Because, yeah, we are looking at it through one lens. We are looking at it from one angle. And from that angle, it looks like, well, he's great. He's fantastic. He's a wonderful young footballer. He's superb. But then you got to think about everything else that comes with that stardom and what might happen to him down the road if you don't manage that properly. It's interesting to get you guys' thoughts on this as well. What have we got? Jid says, just going back to my Villa point, he says, sorry to jump around a little bit, but he said, that's just Unai slander, Harry. You're creating an Unai-centric crisis when there is none. Just referring to what I was saying about Aston Villa. I'm not, mate. I'm not creating anything. If you go back and look at the jobs that Unai Emery has done, they all start with lots of optimism, lots of excitement. And then levels and standards start to drop. And people's counter to that has always been, yeah, but look at what he achieved in European competition. And he achieved some of those European glories and successes in the case of Villarreal, for example, going as far as the semi-final, I think it was, of the Champions League. And they say, no, this was fantastic. This was objectively brilliant. And it is, but it's to the detriment of then what they're able to do in the league. Unai Emery has always struggled to balance those European glories with what his team are expected to achieve in the league. And because they've done well in European competition, that isn't seen as such a big issue. And I understand why people look at that. I know there's a lot of people out there that believe it's trophies, 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 and nothing else really matters in football. And if you're of that viewpoint, then of course you'd pick success in Europe, a triumph on the continent over finishing fourth instead of eighth or whatever. But there was a drop-off at Arsenal. There was a big drop-off at Paris Saint-Germain. There were drop-offs at some of the other clubs he was at the time, Valencia being a real big example of that. So, yeah, let's not pretend that it's all been perfect from Unai Emery, and Villa are on a bit of a bad run at the minute, and that run is lasting a little bit longer than I expected it to, and therefore it's fair to question whether they're going through a similar cycle to some of Unai Emery's previous teams as well. Just going back to Ethan Nwaneri, because that's what I was talking about. Sorry, I digressed a little bit. BX Gunner 81 says, Nwaneri gives me Mbappe at Monaco vibes right before the 2018 World Cup. I mean, I don't know that I want to go that far and say that he's Kylian Mbappe level of talent, but he is a really, really big talent, and I'm really excited to see what the future brings for him. And I guess what you mean by that is that he's kind of at the point where he's just about to explode onto the scene. Maybe that's the case. Rodman says Yamal is ripping it apart at the age of 16. This is nonsense you're talking. Well, yeah, Lamine Yamal is. But there are other examples, Gavi, Pedri, I think are a couple of others where, they've come through at a really, really young age where they've been sort of really hyped up and built up. And yeah, they've done well because they're still very, very young players, but you can burn people out. Some of these young players that come through, they end up suffering with injury problems because their bodies aren't quite ready. You have to judge and assess each of these cases on an individual level. And just because Lamine Yamal is doing it doesn't mean that it's the right thing to throw 17-year-old Ethan Nwaneri in and pin all your hopes on him. Lamine Yamal is a 1 in a million. There aren't many Lamine Yamals out there, I can tell you that. And I just think it's a little bit early to be putting sort of someone like Ethan Nwaneri in the Lamine Yamal category. So that's why I'm cautious around him. That's why I think he needs to be managed in a smart way. Come on, you Gunner says, let me on the stream so I can tear you a new one. No, you're all right, mate. You could do your own stream. See how many people tune in if you're that good. See how it goes. Rodman says Mikel has done a great job balancing the Premier League and Cup competitions, hasn't he, Harry? Sarcastic. No, he hasn't. And I've said going into this season, and I've said it in previous seasons, that that's the one thing that I think he's struggled with. I think rotation is something that he's not been able to nail at the moment. He's not been able to do it. He's not been able to find that right balance when he rotates. With the exception of what we saw on Saturday, we looked disjointed. And I think that's why when people saw the team sheet on Saturday afternoon, they feared the worst. They feared one of those disjointed performances that we've seen in recent years when Mikel Arteta's tried to rotate and got the balance horribly wrong. I wasn't talking about Mikel Arteta. I was talking about Unai Emery and what his previous record tells us about him as a manager, what the patterns of how his team perform in certain stages of the Unai Emery cycle, what those patterns tell us about him. And I'm talking about facts. I'm not talking about things that I've made up or concocted. I'm talking about facts. We dropped off massively after a good surge under Unai Emery. So did Valencia. So did Paris Saint-Germain. It happens to a lot of teams that he's managed in the past. Sevilla's league form at times, despite winning Europa Leagues, was dreadful. And people, for some reason, don't want to talk about that. I get it. It's masked over by the fact that they won European trophies and European silverware. And you could argue that that's more important. But that doesn't mean that Sevilla didn't drop off in terms of their league form as well and have some really bad seasons under Unai Emery in that sense. Kettle and Hobbs says, Harry, you're a balanced sort of human. I'd love to know what you think as to why Arsenal are absolutely useless in Europe. It really is a massive shadow that hangs over your club. Who do you support? Just trying to figure that out. But no, look, I think our record in Europe is poor for a club of this size. There's no question about that. No doubt about that in my mind. What do I put it down to? Difficult to say, because it was bad pre-Arsene Wenger, really, when you think about it. You know, there's some success, but not success in the biggest competitions on the continent. And a club of this size should have European trophies in its trophy room, and we just don't. So I can't put my finger on exactly what the problem is. I think at times we've been inexperienced and we've shown ourselves to be a bit wet behind the ears, a bit naive. I think at times we've had managers that maybe struggled to understand the differences between Premier League football and what's required on the continent. I certainly think that's been a problem for Mikel Arteta in the last few years. I thought against Bayern, we were a bit unlucky to go out actually last year in the Champions League, but the year before when we were dumped out by Sporting, that wasn't good enough. And some of the other Europa League exits under Mikel Arteta were really, really poor. So it's difficult to say what it is exactly, because you're talking about a club-wide problem and a club problem that's been going on for what, 5-6 decades. You know, people would talk about, 94 and all of that, but I think you're being really generous if you're saying that achievement is on par with what a club like Arsenal should be looking to achieve. I'm not saying it wasn't an achievement of any sorts, but this is one of the biggest clubs in world football, and they should be winning the biggest competitions in world football. And the truth is that hasn't happened. So it's a fair criticism. Jid, just on going back to the Unai Emery point, I want to move on from this because Unai Emery was not on the agenda, really. I just wanted to touch on Villa dropping points and my concerns about them at this moment in time. But Jid says you can make the same argument about Klopp and his teams, Harry. Well, look at the drop-off we saw at Liverpool last season and look at how they've started this season. Sometimes it's because people get, do they get sick of it, or do they just become immune to the same message over and over again? And something fresh needs to happen. There needs to be a refreshment. There needs to be a reinvention, if you like. It feels like that's the case. And yeah, Arne Slot's proven that, hasn't he? He's shown that, when things go a little bit stale, no matter how good the manager is, it can happen, that you need someone to come in and freshen things up. And that's what's happened. Look, I've got to move on. I'm just conscious of time because I've got a couple more bits to get through in the last sort of 10 minutes or so of the pod. But I do want to touch on Sporting, our opposition on Tuesday night. What to expect from them? It's kind of difficult to say, really, because the pillar that was propping up their success in recent seasons and so far this season has been taken from underneath them. Ruben Amorim is now the Manchester United boss. His sides were always very well drilled, organised, played at a really high level physically, kind of aligning them, I would say, more with sort of Premier League teams than those, competing in the Portuguese league or some of the other continental leagues. They've still got some really, really dangerous players despite Amorim's exit. They're 6 points clear at the top of the Portuguese top flight. And they won 6-0 at the weekend in a cup game. So they're clearly not feeling sorry for themselves at the moment. They dumped us out of the Europa League the season before last on penalties after Pedro Gonçalves beat Ramsdale from just inside the Arsenal half. Do you remember that? Stunning goal. I was just left with my mouth open when that went in. Couldn't believe it. But the kind of side story to this is that a player who's been heavily linked with a move to Arsenal, and who's a player that I think that a lot of Arsenal fans would welcome with open arms, will be playing against us on Tuesday night, and that is Viktor Gyokeres. 24 goals in all competitions for him so far this season. Not bad. And I know that he's playing against us, and I know that we shouldn't be paying too much attention on him as fans, and we should be focusing on our own players and our own team and what we need to do personally to get things right. But it does feel like a bit of an audition, doesn't it? If he bags a couple of goals against the Arsenal, you're going to get those Arsenal fans jumping online saying, go out and get him, whatever it costs, whatever it takes. If he underwhelms, then the people that were maybe on the fence about him will be saying, nope, he's not the one, go and get someone else, etc., etc. So it does feel like a bit of an audition for Viktor Gyokeres, because we are one of a few teams, I think, that can go out and spend what Sporting are going to be looking for to let him go. I don't think he stays at Sporting beyond this season. I think there was a lot of speculation this summer. I think the injury that he suffered probably meant that a move away was unlikely. But, there's him, there's Conrad Harder. Pedro Gonçalves, I think, is injured for this one, which is good news for us. We don't fancy conceding a goal from halfway again. Trincao is having a decent season. Bragança in midfield, Marcus Edwards, Morita, just some of the players that stand out in this Sporting team. It's going to be an interesting game. I don't think it's going to be easy. And I think that we're in a weird situation with this one, because I look at this Champions League and this new format, and I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to work it out. We're 12th in the league table at the minute, and obviously we want to finish in the top 8. So we've still got work to do in terms of working our way into the position that we want to be in. But then after that, because there are so many games now, we need to consolidate that position and we need to make it our own. I also think we need to build on Saturday's performance. Like, we need to get into a rhythm, and that will only come from more good performances, more good displays, and the confidence that then builds. The kind of beauty of what Mikel Arteta did at the weekend when he made 5 changes was that he can bring in a load of players to freshen things up that ordinarily would be regarded as first choice. But there's a few selection headaches that he has right now, and I do want to touch on some of these before I reveal to you guys my team and my prediction for this one. The first one is Ethan Nwaneri, because whilst I've said that I think he's been managed well so far, and I think it's been handled in the right way, his kind of rise to stardom, there's no doubt in my mind that talent-wise, he is ready. He is ready. You got to factor all the other things I said, the mental toll that it can take, the physical toll that it can take on a young man whose body's still developing and he's still growing, etc., etc. But if we base it on talent alone, and I know I said earlier in the pod that you shouldn't do that, but if you did, he's definitely deserving of more minutes. And if he was to be named on the team sheet on Tuesday night, I wouldn't be annoyed. I wouldn't even be concerned, because I think he's ready enough to be able to handle it from time to time. What I don't want is him to become relied upon, because I think that's where it becomes too much weight for a young man to bear on his shoulders. But if he was to start, I'd have no qualms, because it might be wise to give Martin Odegaard a breather. Like, he came back, played 90 at Chelsea when he was probably not ready to do so, played a significant part again against Nottingham Forest. It might be wise to give him a breather. But if Mikel Arteta doesn't, I'll also understand that point of view too. He's your captain. He sets the tone. Are we back enough to sort of risk leaving him out and struggling to build on that momentum that we built on Saturday? That's the big debate for me and the big question. There's no need, I don't think, to risk Declan Rice if he's still struggling with that toe injury. We got West Ham away coming up at the weekend, and I'm sure he'll be desperate to play in that one. I think Martinelli should come into this side. I think he's better suited to the away trips. There's a couple of players in the defence whose fitness I'm always concerned about, and that's Jurriën Timber and Ricardo Calafiori, are two fairly injury-prone players, in my opinion. I'm not talking about Timber's ACL, by the way. That could happen to anyone. I'm talking about sort of the niggles around that he's suffered since returning. And maybe it's understandable. Maybe it's to be expected given how long he was out for. But yeah, Timber and Calafiori are going to be so important for us on this next run of games that I kind of would like us to take as little risk around those two as we possibly can. Do you maybe throw Kivior in at left back? At right back, we don't really have a choice right now, because Tomiyasu's out, White's out, so it's a problem. We're desperate at right back right now. At left back, though, there are a couple of other options. Do you throw Jakub Kivior in there? Do you even give Alexander Zinchenko a game? That's an option as well. My starting 11 then to face Sporting Lisbon on Tuesday night at the Jose Alvalade Stadium would be Raya in goal, Timber, Saliba, Gabriel, and Calafiori across the back. I'd play Timber and Calafiori from the start, but we've got to manage them really, really carefully. I'd leave Declan Rice out and I'd go with Partey, Marino, and Odegaard in midfield. And then my front three would just be refreshed a little bit. Saka from the right, Martinelli from the left, and Kai Havertz in attack. And my prediction is Sporting 1, Arsenal 1. I don't think this is going to be an easy game. I think people are getting carried away with the fact that Amorim's left. It's still a very good side that will still have so much of what Ruben Amorim drilled into them over the last few years. They'll still be up for this. You know, they proved themselves to be real tough opposition for Manchester City just recently. They beat them comprehensively. I know we said that City are on a bad run and going through a bad patch at the moment, but that's still no mean feat. You know, you've got to give any team credit that blows Manchester City away that they did. Viktor Gyokeres, as I've mentioned, has been in fine form. So I'm not taking Sporting lightly. I feel like we need to start putting more points on the board in this Champions League format if we're going to consolidate an 8th place finish or achieve that, because it's really important. Finishing in the next 8 teams still gives you a chance of going through, but we want to avoid that playoff round, man. Who wants to bloody play in that? We talk all the time about the fixture pile-up, the fixture congestion, how many games we got to contend with. We don't want to add more games to our plate by failing to achieve what we set out to achieve. And I think we're among the best 8 teams in European football. So if we don't finish in the top 8, that will be seen as a failure in my eyes. Regardless of if we then get to the playoff round, progress, etc., etc., it will still be disappointing unless we go on and win it, and then I'll forgive. But anyway, yeah, I think this is going to be a stern test. I think it's going to be a tough test. I feel much more confident about our ability to score goals with Odegaard back, with Saka playing the way that he is, and with us having, Partey sitting in that midfield, and obviously the 2 fullbacks being a little bit more technically gifted than some of the other options that we have. But I think that given we're not 100% back yet, and I know people are going to mock me now because I used the title "We're Back" on the episode yesterday when we reacted to the Forest game. I think we're kind of back, but we're not 100% back yet. And so I would back the draw here if I was to take my Arsenal hat off for a moment and try and give you a prediction with the head rather than the heart. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much. I've given you my lineup. I've given you my prediction. I've shared with you some thoughts on Sporting. We've talked about the rest of the Premier League. Got into a bit of debate with a live chat around Unai Emery and various other bits and pieces too. I will see you on the next one. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode, and we'll be back on Wednesday, of course, to bring you some reaction to the Sporting game. There will be a match day reaction piece over on the Patreon side of things. You can find us patreon.com/The Chronicles of Aguna, but it will be a little bit delayed on Tuesday, I beg your pardon, just due to some of my other work commitments. Don't worry, I'll make it up to you with an extra bit of content. Thank you so much for listening. Until the next one, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Goodbye.